Joining us now, live Cairo. It's hot there, no question about it. Eddie Yeranian with us. Eddie Yeranian, 32-year veteran of radio news, Voice of America, CBS News, and the voice of the Middle East for the John Fredericks Radio Network. Been with me for 9 years. Eddie, great to have you, man.
Thank you, John. It's 100 in Cairo, going up to 104.
I could only imagine what the heat index is today in Cairo, but it seems to be hot everywhere. But all we do is complain, because when it was raining and stuff like that, I was complaining about that. So there's always something going on. Listen, let's get to Iran. The president putting on a new set of sanctions. The Treasury Secretary saying these are aimed at tying up personal money from the supreme ruler and other people involved in the what he calls Iranian regime. To me, better response than dropping bombs on people over some drone. What is your take on this, and what is the Egyptian media saying?
Well, I think the president is winning so long as this doesn't morph into a real hot conflict, which is to say bombs and missiles flying. He's got the Iranians cornered. The Iranians have antagonized most of the world community. They really have no sympathy in the Security Council. Even the Russians are a bit leery of supporting them. And at this point, their economy is tanking. So the danger, of course, is that forces them to lash out. But as Iranian analysts, friends that I've worked with over the years have pointed out repeatedly, Iran lost the 8-year war in the 80s against Iraq, against Saddam Hussein, when it started to target oil tankers in the Gulf. That makes everyone angry. So if they start doing that, then they're in real trouble, because that's where you have the Security Council coming down with the full force of the law saying you can't do that.
So do you think that the president's reaction so far has been spot on?
Yes, I do. I mean, you can never predict where something like this will go. Ultimately, the Iranians are unpredictable. But at this point, it looks like the president has a policy that's winning. I see a lot of people on Twitter who say that it's a losing policy, but of course there are the people that say bad things about the president no matter what he does, so I really wouldn't place much stock in them.
All right, so going forward here, what does Iran do? I mean, the president has been very clear, Eddie Yeranian, I think, in saying, look, I've got one condition for Iran, and that's no nuclear weapon. And that's simplistic, and it's, you know, a lot of the friends I know in diplomatic circles have mocked that as a very dumb, simplistic thing. There's a lot more that goes on with Iran than just a nuclear bomb. They got all these surrogates all over the place. They're in Yemen and they're in Syria, and they've got different channels that they're trying to disrupt different things. But I think for average Americans, the president has made this very clear. Look, I'm open to any negotiation, but no nuclear weapon, period. And so, as simplistic as that is, I think average Americans understand that, and they can get their arms around it and say, okay, let's figure a way out of this, but they can't have nuclear weapons. What say you?
Yes, I think that's what most of America's allies in the Middle East and the Gulf would like to see as well. I think the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Pakistanis, it's just about everyone here in Egypt would like to see an Iran that has no nuclear weapons. I mean, it's maybe simplistic, but that worries a lot of people, not to mention the Israelis, of course, who are probably even more viscerally anti-nuclear when it comes to Iran. Of course, everyone points out that Israel is sitting on its own nuclear weapons. That is true. I wouldn't deny that. But that is the crux of his policy, and I think that is the crux of the worries of most of the Arab states, Gulf states, in addition to all the other problems, the militias they have that are active in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, not to mention the other bad guys they support, like the Muslim Brotherhood and the Hamas people in Gaza.
We're with Edward Yeranian, our man in the Middle East, Voice of America, longtime veteran, radio correspondent, CBS Radio News. Edward, tell us about the death by former President Morsi the other day, dying in a courtroom, and what does that mean for Egypt going forward, and is that basically the end of the Muslim Brotherhood?
I think the Muslim Brotherhood is very active in other places, so it's too soon to see that as the death of the group. They're also very wealthy. They've got a lot of money stashed away in Europe. They have a lot of clout with foreign governments in Europe and in the Middle East. I think they're not going to go away, but here in Egypt, they've become very weak, partially because they're not very popular. I've argued that point with their supporters, and pretty much they don't want to admit that. But Mr. Morsi won 51.8% of the vote during the election in 2012. I remember I did the story. 51.8% with the Liberals. The Liberals later ditched the Muslim Brotherhood because they disagreed about the Constitution. The Muslim Brotherhood wanted to impose a constitution with Sharia law. Sharia law is not popular here in Egypt. So at the very best, the best case scenario, they have, let's say they still have a third of the population that support them. I've bounced that number off a lot of people, and many say, no, that's way too popular. But let's assume they do have a third of the population that still support them. That means they have another third that doesn't support them very actively, and a third in the middle that doesn't really care. That's not the kind of support that would bring them back to power anytime soon.
I would agree with that. It seems like their time there has certainly passed. They had a window, and it turned out to be a complete disaster. If you were to be just in Cairo today and walk the market and talk to average people, and you ask them about the current regime in Egypt, what would be the general statements that you would get just walking around families in a market?
People are upset. Prices have gone up. Of course, prices have gone up because the country has gone into debt and had to borrow money from the International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund forces countries to follow economic principles which are not always in the best interest of the people on the ground, the citizens. I think that in a way the Muslim Brotherhood has taken revenge on the current government by making the situation untenable politically in some cases and forcing the tourist trade to deteriorate with attacks, sporadic attacks on tourist buses and things like that. They will deny that they're behind it, but I think fairly clearly they are. Someone who tried to blow himself up was pretty much ID'd as a Muslim Brotherhood supporter. Everyone has suffered by the political situation. It was not an ideal situation, but I don't see that there were a lot of other ways out of their impasse back in 2014, even though it was an ugly conclusion to the scenario.
I agree with you there. I think you're spot on. Eddie Yeranian with us live in Cairo, our man in the Middle East. I'm in Miami, Florida today. This is the scene of the Mike Pence visit, the vice president coming to launch Latinos for Trump 2020, co-chaired by the lieutenant governor of Florida, Cuban-American, and also the scene for Wednesday and Thursday's Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey, who can out-socialist and communist each other, the Democratic Party debate. Can't miss that. Got to be here for that. And got baseball going on also. So all in one. Eddie Yeranian with us. Eddie, so the U.S. to launch its first part of the Middle East peace plan in Bahrain today. Jared Kushner's been working on this for 2 years. Now, just a quick disclaimer. I like Jared a lot. I know him personally. I think he's very smart. I think he's a really good guy. And I can tell you for a fact he's a great father. The guy is very talented. I get what he's trying to do. But basically, this hinges in Bahrain on them raising $50 billion to invest in Palestine. I don't think this thing is going anywhere, Eddie, because based on everybody I've talked to in that region over the years, I don't think that you can buy off the Palestinians' consent here with $50 billion or $100 billion because I think it's about freedom and sovereignty in their own state and not a economic bailout. I don't think it's going to fly, but I do appreciate the effort. Okay, let me put it that way. What say Eddie Yeranian?
Yes, I like to be optimistic. I like to think that someone is trying, even though the chances of success are not very good, even though both the Israelis and the Palestinians have not shown up for this Bahrain conference. Maybe something good will come out of it. You never know. Why not try? I don't believe in throwing in the towel. I've been, as you said, been in the Middle East for 32 years. Of course, if you want to be pessimistic about it, look at Yitzhak Rabin. I mean, he was shot for signing a peace deal, shot by people from his own side. When I was in Beirut, when Rabin was shot, I remember Palestinians firing into the air with their Kalashnikovs to celebrate. So obviously they weren't happy about making peace with Israel. So there are always people out there that have no interest in making a peace deal, that don't want to make a peace deal, that will say bad things about a peace deal. So why join them? I don't want to join them, even if they may be right, that nothing will come out of it. Maybe nothing will come out of it. Who knows? But nothing was coming out of any of the other diplomacy either. So watching the people from the Obama administration badmouth Jared Kushner, I think it's ridiculous. What did they come up with? Nothing.
I agree with you. I agree 100%. Look, I wouldn't gamble on it passing, right? If I was in Vegas and there were odds on it, I mean, if to take this bet, I would have to get something like 75-1. So I don't think it's going anywhere. But once again, Edward, that's why I have you on every week. You are spot on. At least they're trying. I don't think the Palestinian regime is ever going to go with anything that doesn't give them a sovereign state, because that's really what they're fighting for. They're not fighting for an economic handout. But, the first stage is going to be launched at this conference in Bahrain, and Kushner trying to put an array of donors together to raise $50 billion to pump in to Palestinian schools, infrastructure, and everything else in order to give them everything they need to have a successful territory without sovereignty, I guess, economically, as far as schools, infrastructure, roads, water, things of that nature, sewer, pipeline. And Bahrain, a close ally of the U.S. and home to the Navy's Fifth Fleet, as you know, has been making these preparations for weeks. And under the plan, donor nations and investors, I'm almost out of time, would contribute $50 billion over 10 years, with $28 billion going to the Palestinian territories, the Israeli-occupied West Bank and the Gaza Strip, $8 billion to Jordan, $9 billion to Egypt, $6 billion to Lebanon. At least it's a start. We can have a conversation, Eddie. I think, though, it's dead on arrival. I got to go. Unfortunately, I'm at the bottom of the hour. Edward Yeranian, thanks for being with us. John Fredericks Radio Network.